You know, when you're thinking about starting a podcast and you begin to Google all the different names that you have been wanting, and you keep running up against 5, 6 different variations of that people have already taken. So this question has been coming up for me a lot in a lot of the podcast consultations that I do. And so I wanted to take some time to address it because there's a couple different approaches that you can take. And I also have, now experience over the last few years getting to see some clients who have used these approaches and how it's kind of, played out for them and if it has posed any problems. The reason it's important to make sure you put enough time and effort into the name of your show is because you're not going to be as excited about your podcast if you don't feel good about your name. Trust me, I have had several shows in the past that have not done well and that have done well where you look at it and you're like, man, I wish I picked a better name, right? And it's okay. You might have times where you're going to rebrand it down the road, but at the same time, you are doing yourself a favor by putting a disproportionate amount of time into the name of your show. Because if there's one thing that a potential listener or viewer is going to do or remember when they are kind of referring your show, it's going to be the name, right? It's the name that is the most catchy. And then it's often the tagline after that. So I'm going to break down how you can make the right move depending on your situation. I found that this issue mostly comes when you are choosing a bigger or broader name or topic. So I'll give you an example. I had a client that I work with and I helped launch their show. It's called The Deep Life. Now, The Deep Life is the name of a podcast from a famous professor called Cal Newport, right? Obviously, there's strong branding and things like that that are already there on that show. And so you have to think about that. If that is the case when you Google all the shows that are out there versus if you see many options where, hey, these people maybe started the show 3 years ago, but they haven't published since. So those are two different scenarios, and that might inform your approach, whether to, you want to move forward with that name or you want to change it up slightly. I've seen multiple instances of this, by the way, not just with my own clients, but with famous celebrities that are out there, right? When they begin to launch their own show, they call it something that a less famous person might already have. And so for some reason in the podcasting world, it is not as weird to, have two shows that have the same name. It's like the person who has the better branding will likely win the majority of the audience. But at the same time, the show name will just mean something different to the different viewers. So The Deep Life, for people who are fans of Cal Newport or are in the productivity world, they are going to think of that first, right? Sometimes we assume that everybody we know knows of all these other people too, and that's not really the case. So, in this scenario, the audience that my clients had gathered for their version of The Deep Life was totally different topic, totally different audience, and they likely may not have known who Cal Newport was, right? So that changes things. Let me give you another example. So Doing the Work podcast with Ethan Schindler. He's one of my clients. And when we were first launching his show, we obviously looked at all of the different other shows that were named Doing the Work. And it is a common phrase, right? Do the work, doing the work. We tried to mess with different variations of that we liked. But hey, doing the work is kind of what we wanted to stick with. Let's say you've decided, okay, I'm going to keep the name of this show. Despite there being multiple people out there, I'm going to take the chance. The next thing that you might want to do to protect yourself or consider is adding a W and a / to represent with and then your name next to it. So if it was something like Doing the Work, and it's a common podcast name out there already, what you would do is go Doing the Work with Ethan or Doing the Work with Ethan Schindler. And yes, what this might do is kind of, if you're scanning podcasts on the Apple or Spotify feed, typically after the name of the show, you have the artist who is typically the host that's going to appear underneath there. So yes, let's say in this case, the creator is me, Misbah Haque. If I basically have that there, I am going to be putting that twice, right? So Doing the Work with Misbah Haque is going to be on top of Misbah Haque, the artist's name. But if you don't mind that, and in most cases it's not really a big deal, that can be a great solution for you to kind of get around this. The next thing can be, instead of adding your name at the end, you could add your tagline. So let's say it was doing the work, semicolon, and then whatever a 3 or 5 word tagline would be. So if you really were attached to the name and you wanted to kind of differentiate, you could use that instead of the name, but it still gives it a little more of a personalized feel. One of the other issues that you might find yourself running into is that the domain name is not available. So doing the work was something that is, likely somebody owns it and they're selling it for thousands and thousands of dollars. So it's kind of too common of a phrase or name where it's probably owned by somebody already. But there's no active maybe site there, right? So something that you can do is go doing the work podcast. And so when we added podcast at the end there, that domain name was available. Now, the problem with that domain name is that it is a little bit long, right? Somebody has to really type out a lot to kind of get to this destination. So the way around this is typically ensuring that you go with your name. So I basically had Ethan also make sure to purchase his name, ethanschindler.com. And that kind of goes to the same destination as doing the work podcast does, right? So, or actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think we even got like do the work podcast. So that was even more confusing because it's slightly off compared to the actual name of the show, right? So this is where using your name is kind of fail proof. That is something that's not going to change. Your interests might evolve, that businesses you're a part of or ventures you're a part of might evolve, but you can easily update that on your site. Now, lastly, the thing that I want to disclose is this is totally still uncharted territory, right? So if somebody actually wanted to come out and sue you because you are using their name and, they wanted to take it that far, honestly, I'm sure that they could, right? So that's where I like to avoid it altogether in the first place, if and when possible. But really what most people are doing is taking the chance, right? It's like 2 shows with the same name can exist. Most of the time, one person will stop publishing before the other does, right? But I always give that disclaimer to people where it's like you really just want to, maybe at some point when you have the budget, right, talk to a copyright lawyer, talk to a trademark lawyer, or actually incorporate the name of your show as a business, right? You can do some of these steps to actually take it a step further and protect yourself in case that were to happen. But my job is to just point that out and make sure that you know and you're aware that that could be a thing. Is it a thing in most cases? Not really, right? I haven't heard of too many scenarios where this is a thing, but it's something that I foresee becoming an issue somewhere down the line, especially as you have bigger and bigger companies like Amazon and SiriusXM and Spotify, all of these different behemoths getting involved in podcasting. It's like, what if they come up with a special limited series where they want to use the name of that show and you have it also, right? If we play that out, in a lot of cases, they might just move forward with the name of that show despite you, having it. They might not even contact you about that. It's just kind of like, this actually happened with Kevin Hart and Andrew Schultz back in the day. So Andrew Schultz is a comedian and he has a show. His podcast name is called Flagrant, right? And I remember when Kevin Hart basically started his podcast, it was first called Flagrant or something related to that, right? Close enough where fans of Andrew were tagging him and kind of calling out Kevin, right? To the point where Kevin basically had to address it. He made a video where he's all like, oh, there's a comedian that recently came to my attention. He already has the name of this show, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't aware of that and kind of just owned up to the mistake. But it was an excellent example for the power of branding and the power of audience, right? You didn't even have to say anything. Your audience went and fought that battle for you. And there were so many people, right, that it got his attention enough where he had to address it. And so it's an example of how this dynamic works with traditionally a brand like Kevin, who was way, way, way bigger and more powerful and at the time especially, and still is, whatever, but like at the time he was even more powerful and he probably could have pushed ahead and moved forward with it if he wanted to. But the potential blowback of Andrew's fans kind of not liking that made it not worth it for even this bigger brand and company to move forward with taking the name of that show. So if there's one lesson from this, it's knowing that you can actually own the name by creating a volume of content, by building a vast catalog of content. Because when other people are maybe considering that same name that you are, they're going to look for these same things. They're going to go and see, okay, has this person published recently? And hey, if you had published in the last 90 days, maybe, okay, cool, this name's taken. People might just kind of pass it. But if you have only 3 episodes, right, and you kind of stopped after that, it doesn't actually seem to be preventing people from taking the name of that show and just running with it and building a body of work around it. So most of my clients and most of the DMs and stuff I get around this, they end up actually choosing to move forward with the name of the show, knowing this risk, knowing that, hey, somebody could one day come after you. It's maybe not likely, but it is something that could happen, right? And so that's just something for you to know. Like, even when I tell people that, a lot of them are unfazed, and based on kind of the examples that they see out there, they're like, cool, I'll deal with the blowback later. So that is not what I'm recommending, by the way, but it is, something that I'm surprised by. Sometimes I'm surprised by how much people love the name of their show, that they're willing to go that far. But hey, that's how it should be. That's how much you should enjoy the name of your show, because hopefully it's going to be around for a long time, minimum 3 to 5 years. And so if you can kind of, really hang on to that name, it's not just the name that's everything, right? Your episodes and your thoughts and everything behind it is what gives that name meaning. Pick any show that you can think of that's a famous podcast. It wouldn't really have the same ring to it if you wiped away all the content that's there and maybe you filled in your version of what you would have on that show, right? It would have a different vibe to it. So naming your podcast is important. I hope this was helpful in doing so. Make sure to check out the links and free tools, pay tools, all that good stuff in the description below. I appreciate you hanging out. If you have any questions, let me know. I would love to hear from you. But thanks again, and I will see you on the next one.